and welcome to the SFPE Lightning Talk. My name is Grace Hitchcock and I will be your MC for tonight. We are SFPE, which is the Society of Fire Protection Engineers, and this is on behalf of the New Zealand chapter. Just to introduce us on a really high level, what fire engineers are about is aiming to design buildings so that if there's a fire, we want people to be able to get out of a building in time. We don't want that fire to spread to other people's property or buildings, and we want firefighters to be able to do their job. And there are a few different things that we look at to try and achieve that. One of them is fire and smoke spread in a building. We look at previous fire research and investigations. We look at people movement. We look at the different fire protection systems you can put into a building, like sprinklers or smoke detectors. And we look at trying to make sure a structure isn't going to collapse in a fire either. So we have a range of presenters with a different level of experience from different parts of the industry. So we have people, Kevin from more of a research background, and then we have some from more of a consulting background. So I think we'll go straight into them. We're going to start off with Debbie Scott. She's going to do her presentation, and we're going to have a quick question time for her so she can pop off. And then we'll get into our other presenters and have a question time for all of them at the end. So Debbie, I will pass it on to you.
Thanks, Grace. So hi everyone, I'm Debbie Scott, and I know that this is meant to be a day in the life. However, I'm pretty sure that you don't want to hear that I woke up at 5:30 a.m. I did the Wordle, got it in 3 today, and that I then had to take my daughter to lacrosse practice at 6 a.m. at school, nor do you want to hear about my son's guitar lessons that I was organising and how much time I spent emailing clients and on the phone, not to mention my puppy poo incident at 2 a.m. So instead, I'm going to break the rules a little bit, and I'm going to give you a snapshot into my career as a fire engineer, and I'll try and convince you why you should give fire engineering a go and how rewarding it is. So I am the principal fire engineer at On Fire Consulting Limited. I went to school in Christchurch. I did a Bachelor of Chemical and Process Engineering at the University of Canterbury. Then I did a Master's of Fire Engineering and I got distinction also at the University of Canterbury. Then I started my working life in the 1990s, 1999 to be exact. So after that, I worked in Christchurch at 2 different consultancies before moving to Auckland, where I started work at JIB, otherwise known as Winstone Wallboards, and make plasterboard. I was involved as a building systems development manager then. I did fire testing, I helped develop new products. I was on site assisting with queries when JIB was being used on site, and other various bits and pieces there. After working at the consultancies and at JIB, I applied to become a chartered professional engineer. And they are an engineer who has proven competence and experience in their practice area. So I received my Chartered Professional Engineering status whilst still in Auckland and consulting. And after a few more years of consulting engineering, I left Auckland and I started On Fire Consulting in Te Awamutu in 2004. So I live in Te Awamutu. I'm pretty lucky to have a big city job with a rural lifestyle. On Fire Consulting started in our lounge. We moved to the garage when we had our first employees. In 2012, we moved to an office in town. We now have 2 offices, Auckland and Te Awamutu, 13 employees, 10 fire engineers, 4 chartered professional engineers, and 1 satellite office in Oamaru in the South Island. We're one of New Zealand's largest sole discipline fire engineering companies. So sole discipline meaning we only do fire engineering. We're not a multidiscipline company that does all the other types of engineering. So we do fire engineering, and I like to think we do it well. We've got a great team of engineers here, including Grace, who introduced you all to fire engineering just before. So thanks, Grace, for putting this on. So yeah, over the years, we've become quite specialised in retail projects and worked on some pretty large malls, including Sylvia Park and Te Awa in Hamilton, just to name a few. On one of those photos there, the bottom right photo, that's at Sylvia Park last year at about, I don't know, 2 a.m. we were doing smoke testing in the building, ready for opening in a couple of days' time. So you'll see a plume of smoke there in the background. So that's Grace on the right, and then Scott, one of our other engineers there. Luckily with our retail projects, except this particular day, I always manage to fit in a little bit of retail therapy, which I do enjoy. Some other projects that I've worked on include hotels in Fiji, the Vodafone Stadium in Fiji, hospitals, warehouses, large manufacturing facilities, as well as normal type buildings such as office buildings, schools, apartments, etc. I'm also get quite involved in expert witness work with lawyers on court cases. So that bottom left photo was actually us working on a building down in Queenstown, where we had to pull the building apart piece by piece to determine how it was constructed and determine how it might be fixed in the future, and deal with the legal side of things with the lawyers as well. As well as other work like that. So I'll just go through these photos quickly. So that photo top right, that was an office building that I worked on with Grace. It was made out of mass timber, or CLT, which is just very thick timber that is used as a construction practice. The one on the top left is a photo of me about to go about 10 metres high up a building in the pouring rain and wind to check the facade was being installed correctly. So our job is not just an office job. We get on site quite a lot and we do lots of different and interesting things. Other things that I've done pre-COVID, I've spoken at conferences in Tokyo, Hong Kong, Australia, as well as at Cambridge University in the UK, which was a bit of a highlight. And I ended up taking my 15-month-old twins along to that particular conference. So fire engineering, it's opened up so many awesome opportunities for me. I've spent a considerable amount of my time volunteering, my time in professional organisations. I was one of the youngest ever governing board members of Engineering New Zealand. Previously, it was called IPENS. I was an executive member of SFPE New Zealand, and then I was president of the same. Now I'm a governor of the Society of Fire Protection Engineers International Foundation, and I'm also a new board member of the newly formed CPENG board. So I put in a lot of time to my profession, a lot of my own time, but this has given me a number of opportunities as well. So I feel like as much as I give, I get back, both personally and for the business. I recently received a fellowship of Society of Fire Protection Engineers, and a little while ago I also received a fellowship of Engineering New Zealand. So that's been pretty special for me. So as you can probably tell, I imagine, I'm a fairly busy person in my working life. However, I do still try and make time for myself and of course my family. I, throughout this time, have brought up twins. They are 14 years old now, so they've grown up with On Fire, or they've known as me working and On Fire. I also have 2 stepsons who are in their 20s. I am pretty heavily involved in their schooling, sports and performing arts as well. I've been on school boards and volunteering my time to coach netball teams, etc. So I put a lot of my time and effort both into work activities, but also into these personal activities. I do try and get a little bit of downtime. So as a family, we like to surf together, we go on bike rides together, and we do lots of other activities. About 4 years ago, I decided to do something a little bit out of my comfort zone, and I started ballet dancing. So my daughter has been doing it since she was 3, and I decided at age 40 something or other that I thought I could start it as well. And so I do that 3 times a year. I sit exams, and I'm hoping that shortly I might be on point. So that's going on those toe shirts. So that's a little bit about me and my career in fire engineering. I hope that it's shown you that with hard work and determination, anything's possible. One thing I haven't highlighted but should is that what I look for in young engineers that we employ. Basically, I like to see that an engineer has the ability to communicate with all types of people, that they have the ability to take initiative, And of course, I'd like to see that you've passed your university courses, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an A+ student. We like to see people that are well-rounded. So that's me, thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. We will try and take some questions now for Debbie. If anyone has them, we can put them in the screen in the Q&A box and see if there's anything you'd like to ask. Okay, how many interns would you usually take a year, Debbie?
We started 2 this year, but probably 1 would be what I would prefer to do. We actually often take an engineer that's done a bachelor's and not their master's yet. We take them from their bachelor, and then we would put them through the master's course at University of Canterbury part-time, so that they work whilst they're doing the course. So we find that's quite a really good way of both getting a great engineer, but also it's really good for the engineer to learn the job whilst they're learning the technical side at university.
Thanks, Debbie. What is the worst part of your job?
I can't say employees because you're here, Grace. I guess it could just be the long hours, and probably the long hours and not getting that work-life balance sorted, but I'm getting better at that. So it just takes time, and you've got to be on top of it the whole time.
Okay, next question. If someone has graduated with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, can they apply to be a fire engineer or intern?
Yeah, so you can either go and do the fire engineering degree at the University of Canterbury if you've got your bachelor's degree already. So that's if you're in New Zealand, I assume that you are. So yeah, you can go to University of Canterbury and do the Masters of Fire Engineering, or other companies like ourselves, or ourselves, we do take bachelor degrees that we then put through the Masters of Engineering course.
Did you always work full time, or did you at some stage in your life take reduced hours to achieve a work-life balance?
I'd like to be able to say that I took reduced hours, but I didn't. On Fire started in 2004, 2005. My twins were born in 2008. I was working full time the whole time. I guess the week they were born or a few weeks after they were born, I reduced my hours. But unfortunately, I had a new business. I was a one-man band, and I had to carry on. Otherwise, On Fire wouldn't be where it is today. So I guess that's a little bit of a regret I have, but I've got massive positives out of it as well. So it's give and take.
And we might go last question. Do you need to have an engineering degree to join your company? But I think you probably answered that to an extent there.
Yeah, I mean, just having a look at that question, yeah, there will be some fire engineers out there who don't have a fire engineering degree. There's a different pathway for people to get chartered professional engineering if they don't have an engineering degree, but it's actually quite a difficult pathway to take. So that's not common, but it is possible.
Okay, we might wrap up questions for Debbie there and move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Tyler from Beca. If you jump on now, Tyler.
Alrighty. Well, hi everyone. Thanks for having me, Grace, and of course Engineering New Zealand. It's a real privilege to be here and presenting in front of you all. So I figured I'd just get started by telling you all a bit about myself. So my name's Tyler. I'm a graduate fire engineer at Beca, where I've been working for about 1.5 years, I'd say, of course, after graduating from university. Speaking of which, I went to AUT, where I studied architectural engineering. If you're not quite sure what that is, that's all good. I always say that it's basically structural engineering, but with a bit of an emphasis on the wider design of buildings. And then, of course, in addition to my full-time employment at Beca, I'm also studying my my Masters of Engineering Studies, specialising in fire engineering part-time at the University of Canterbury. So how did it all get started? How did I end up where I am today? Well, straight off the bat, while I was doing my undergrad studies, I had never actually heard about fire engineering. I had no idea what it was. And then during my undergrad studies, I did an internship at the Auckland Council, and I started coming across this fire engineering documentation. And I thought to myself, oh, this is, pretty interesting. They appear to do some pretty cool stuff, have some cool content in their report. I think I might have to investigate this a bit further. So I started reaching out to a few different people within the industry, asking questions, doing my own research, and eventually I was sold. This is the field of engineering that I wanted to explore, that I wanted to pursue. And not long after that, I accepted a graduate role at Beca, and also enrolled in the master's program at the University of Canterbury. So why did I choose fire engineering? I think that's quite a poignant question. Well, for me, one of the really things that was valuable and that I saw was really cool about fire engineering is that it's, relatively speaking, quite a new discipline, actually, with respect to, say, usual structural engineering, for example. And what that means is there are lots of opportunities for you to contribute towards the development of this industry and really distinguish yourself in doing so. Another really cool thing that I find about fire engineering is that we actually provide lots of input in the early stages of a building's design, for example, and of course beyond. But what that means is we have the opportunity to actually have a lot of influence in the design of buildings to, of course, achieve better outcomes for clients, but also the users of those buildings. And this also gives us as fire engineers the opportunity to be quite client facing, which is really cool. And even as a grad, I'm surprised at how much I've been able to engage with clients and design stakeholders during the early stages of the design process. And of course, one of the really cool things about fire engineering, and something that's actually quite noble, come to think of it, is that we actually have the opportunity to make buildings safer and the built environment around us, which really gives me personally a lot of gratification in what I do. So that's all well and good, but what do fire engineers actually do? What do fire engineering consultants do? Well, firstly, you may be asking, where does it all fit in terms of the design of buildings? Well, here you can see a little diagram which kind of represents what maybe a conventional design team would look like, where you have structural engineers kind of on one branch and then your building services on the other with mechanical, electrical, and what have you. Traditionally speaking, fire engineering kind of sits as like a specialist building service, if you will. But that's not to say that we don't have a lot of interface with, for example, structures. And of course, bearing in mind, we're not only limited to the design of buildings. Quite often, we're actually involved in industrial projects and maybe even infrastructure projects, which is really cool. So the mix of projects that you'll be able to experience as a fire engineer is really quite vast. I guess on a day-to-day level, some of the tools that we use and processes we follow. So what we really do is we develop the fire safety strategies of buildings. How are we going to be able to safely get everyone out of the building in the event of a fire, and maybe even protect the owner's property if that's indeed what they want. So to do this, we use obviously the New Zealand Building Code and quite prescriptive documents, or alternatively, we can kind of go beyond that and use first engineering principles, really raw calculations, and sometimes even, as you can see there, computer aided modeling. And there are some cool little snips that you can see on the screen there of what we do with our computer modeling. That could be, modeling the egress of a building's occupants, or modeling smoke, as Debbie touched on earlier. And of course, another really fundamental aspect of a fire engineering consultant's skill set and day-to-day work is working with others. So of course we actually define the performance requirements of a building, which speak to what, say, the mechanical engineer or the electrical engineer will have to in turn incorporate as part of their design. So that really ties into the interdisciplinary coordination, which you can see there, which is actually a really cool aspect, working with other design disciplines as part of what we do. And then, of course, as you can see in the last point there, we work with stakeholders and clients to achieve the best outcomes possible, as I touched on earlier. So how do you get started as a fire engineer? Well, this appeared to be a question that was asked quite often following Debbie's presentation. There are a few pathways you can take, and not all of them explicitly dictate that you need to have an engineering degree. So the two main courses that typically you would take are either the Master of Engineering Studies, specializing in fire engineering, which is quite similar to, say, like a fourth-year engineering course where you take around about 8 papers. The alternative to that is the baseline Master of Fire Engineering, which is the same as the Master of Engineering Studies, but it also has a research component. So that's definitely worth looking into if research and maybe developing a thesis is something you're passionate about. And also there are full-time and part-time pathways available for both of these different papers. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm in the part-time pathway. So there are quite a few challenges in fire engineering, to be honest, but they aren't negative challenges. They always build you up and build you up in your career. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges I faced is the client-facing role that you sit in, and you really kind of need to build up your confidence there. But it's always a great opportunity, and you always feel really satisfied after coming away from, say, a client meeting and having achieved a really great result for the people that you're working with. Of course, the coordination, which I touched on earlier, working with other engineers to really crack through a problem and develop an awesome outcome. And of course, you can see there, no day is the same. There's always a new challenge which you haven't experienced before, which you sometimes have to crack through. And of course, as fire engineers, we're kind of a jack of all trades in some respects. We need to be master wordsmiths to craft our reports in the right way to convey information to regulatory stakeholders, and say the Auckland Council, for example, or Fire and Emergency New Zealand. We need to be mathematicians when we're running through our various calculations, and sometimes even computer gurus when we're going through our modeling. But at the end of the day, in spite of some of the challenges you'll face, there's honestly so much to love about fire engineering. I think one of the cool things is it's a really niche discipline. Like, whenever you tell someone that you're a fire engineer, they're always like, oh, wow, that's so cool. Like, you must have such a cool job. And yeah, I do have a cool job. It's awesome. Another cool thing is that typically as fire engineers, we work in quite small teams, which is really nice. And I work at Beca, which is quite a large multidisciplinary consultancy with thousands of people. But you can see in that image in the top right, our team is actually pretty small, and it feels like family, which is awesome. Like you'll hear from Priya later on tonight. But if ever I have any issues that I'm dealing with or a problem, I'll just give Priya a call, and we'll try and figure it out together. So that's one of the really cool things about fire engineering, that you treat your work colleague kind of like family, like, and that's really cool. Of course, there's the master's program. I mean, you get to burn stuff. That should be tempting enough to get along to that. Of course, seeing the buildings that you've designed come alive, and at the end of the day, making the built environment around us safer for the people that use these buildings. So yeah, that's pretty much it from me. So
thanks, Tyler. That's awesome. We'll jump on to Kevin Frank now. Kevin's from BRANZ, and I'm sure he will let you know what he does.
Yeah, hi there. My name's Kevin Frank, and as you can tell from the accent, I'm not originally from New Zealand. I'm actually from Canada. So yeah, it's been really good, I think, following up the last two, because been writing down a few notes, some really good things that tie in. As you may have picked up, oh, let me start out. So I'm coming from a little bit different perspective because I sort of do research in my day-to-day life, but as you will have picked up from the other two presentations, research does come into play for consulting fire engineers as well. So how did I get into fire? I'll put in a bit of a shameless plug here. If you want to learn more about being a fire engineer, a really good place to start is the Fire Science Show, which is a podcast by a guy in Poland named Wojciech. But one of the guests on that had a quote that really resonated with me. He said basically he fell into fire by accident, but once you walk into a fire lab, it's really hard to walk out. Basically just following on from what Tyler was saying, I didn't get enough of burning stuff in uni, so kept doing it for the rest of my have kept doing it for the rest of my career. So I started out in mechanical engineering, and my first jobs, I did a co-op degree, so I took an extra year of my bachelor's to do some work experience. And my first jobs are sort of in oil and gas, which is sort of the main industry back in Canada. And some of those jobs, I did start to get exposed to some fire protection in some of the major facilities I was working in. But it's really when I went to do my master's, I actually ended up changing topics, but I started working with the company and they had some fire safety challenges. So my master's research ended up being fire related. After that, I did a bit of work in sort of slightly unrelated sort of alternative energy research. But during that time, I got involved as a volunteer firefighter. And that again, just sort of contributed to me going down a fire path. And then I actually ended up taking a job as a forensic engineer, and a lot of what I was doing was fire investigation. So there again, the fire connection. With all of that, I sort of still wanted to develop my skills a bit more. So I was sort of looking at PhD programs and ended up coming down to New Zealand to the University of Canterbury to do my PhD in fire. And that was sort of what really solidified my pathway in fire research. All right, so yeah, so talking sort of about a day in the life and then some of the pathways to fire research. What I will use as a bit of an analogy is tramping. So, Tyler and Debbie have said, there is a lot of variety in the day, so it's hard to sort of pick a single day. But there's definitely, like tramping, you spend a bit of time slogging through the trees. It's hard work. You're, tired, you're hot. You don't necessarily see the point sometimes. And then you get above the tree line. It's like, wow, it's this amazing vista. But, sometimes you need to put more of that slog in to get to those, the higher and more exciting summits. So I think that's kind of a good analogy. I'll sort of cover that a bit more as I continue. So the slog through the tree. So one of the podcast guests again on the Fire Science Show, Mike Spearpoint, he was my PhD supervisor that some of the other fire engineers will recognize. He's actually moved back to the UK, but the quote he had was, you'll find during the course of your research that even a monkey could do what you're doing, and you're the monkey. So there's a lot of reading, there's a lot of study and stuff like that goes into it. You might do a bit of building if you're doing some experimental stuff. And the forensic stuff, fire is dirty. What's left after fire is dirty. If you're burning stuff in the lab, somebody has to clean it up. That's usually you. As a forensic engineer, you're crawling through a lot of fire scenes. So it can be quite dirty. You have to be a bit careful on the health and safety side that you're not breathing stuff in, things like that. So there are those aspects to the job. But I mean, then you get those days when you're on the summit, when you're actually burning something, you get to see how fire performs, how building materials perform. So the picture on the left is an experiment that we did for one of my main projects. I should mention, sorry, I work for BRANZ. So BRANZ does both commercial fire testing. So if there's a company that has a fire door or something like that, or when Debbie was working for JIB and developing building systems, they'd come up with a new wall, they'd bring it to BRANZ to get tested. So that's the commercial side. The research side is really about supporting the building regulations, what's in the building code. As Tyler was saying, fire is a bit of a new discipline. There's a lot of research that needs to be done yet. So that picture on the left, yeah, it's one of the experiments. Particularly looking at external fire spreads, a big thing at the moment after quite a few high profile international fires that have happened in recent years. Sort of the next picture along actually isn't a research one, that's a volunteer firefighting one, but I highly recommend, if you think about getting into fire engineering, a bit of practical background is really useful as well. And then, as Debbie was saying, there are a lot of opportunities for travel as a researcher. So that picture's from Shanghai, and you get to, it's not necessarily just travel as a tourist either. A lot of times they have tours of facilities or buildings and things like that. So you get to see things behind the scenes a bit too. So there's that as well. And you do get to present to people. I do a bit of lecturing from time to time down at University of Canterbury and different things. So dealing with people is quite a big thing, but it can be quite gratifying when you're presenting some of your research to an audience. So just again, getting back to the whole research analogy and how the sort of the path is. You can think about high school as being a really well-traveled path. It's like one that a lot of people go down. So usually they're kind of a bit on the easier side. The path is easier to find. Then you get to your undergraduate degree, you're kind of going off onto a more specialized path. There's less people. It's getting a bit harder. Research is where you can go off in sort of whatever direction you want. So it can be a bit disconcerting though, because there's no map to follow. So you're kind of on your own. You're sort of pushing the boundaries of what knowledge is. So there are challenges. It can be, there are days when you're like, am I doing this right? Am I going in the right direction? So it can be quite tricky. So that is something to weigh up when you're looking at different career paths. Some people really like that. I tend to, I kind of enjoy that bit. It's not necessarily for everybody. So in terms of the pathways to fire research, so some of this, again, Debbie and Tyler have touched on. Research is one area where good grades do help. You can actually do reasonably well with scholarships once you get to postgraduate degrees, either from the government or sometimes industry is funding something to solve specific problems, or even just general scholarships. So yeah, it's not too bad. You can, you probably don't make quite as much as a consulting engineer, but you can sort of support yourself. So it's a little different than undergraduate when you have to pay for things with student loans or savings and stuff like that. And definitely the transferable skills. I will sort of I've got another analogy. So research, you are getting a bit more specialized, but there's still a lot of skills that contribute to that. So, having those solid engineering fundamentals is important. There's not really very many undergrad programs in fire, but there's a lot of sort of more general ones that are good backgrounds for fire. So I'm a mechanical engineer. Architectural engineering, as Tyler said, even you find fire engineers that came from chemical, civil, and even electrical sometimes. So all of them sort of have things that contribute really well to fire. Again, the communications, like what both Debbie and Tyler said, being able to write well, being able to describe things really well, and being able to draw things, visualize things is really quite important. Building up that toolbox, sort of computational, as you saw from Tyler, computer modeling, but just coding things, that, automating things, that tasks that you do all the time could really make you a lot more efficient and productive. And from a research standpoint, it's quite important as well. And like I said, the practical skills, taking up a trade can be quite useful. If you come as a fire engineer after having a trade, that'll always be seen as really valuable. Firefighting fit in really well for me, being a volunteer firefighter. You can do it outside of your regular job, so you can do it at the same time as doing other things, and even things like photography. So, getting back to the graphical communications, a really good photo or visualizing something can be really important for communicating your research across. The one thing I will say, if you do decide to do a PhD, make sure you take the time to pick a topic that really interests you. So this is where, like for me, working for a few years before I did my PhD, working in a field that was related to, finding that fire was something that interested me, I think is really important. You want to take that time, because when you're spending 3+ years sort of wandering around in the, in the bush, proverbial bush without a map, you'll definitely thank yourself if it's really something that you enjoy. So just as a final thought on research. So research is really about depth versus breadth. So if you think about it, you can sort of move a certain amount of dirt. You can do a certain amount of effort in your career. So research is really about going deep. You can either make that hole really broad and not very deep, or you can go really deep into new areas and stuff like that. That's what research is all about. That's it for me. So I think we'll go on to the next presenter.
Awesome, thanks, Kevin. Our next presenter is Peter. Peter is working at FENS in the engineering unit there. So I will pass you on to him.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's my turn. welcome to the lightning talks. I appreciate the opportunity to be involved in this event. So my name is Peter Wei. I'm a graduate fire engineer at Fire and Emergency New Zealand. I work in the fire engineering unit under the National Risk Reduction Team. We are not firefighters, just let you know, because I can't remember how many times people ask me, are you a firefighter? We do wear uniforms, but we are fire engineers, so we are more type of office person. Just a bit about my background. I used to work in the civil geotechnical engineering industry for about 5 years. I used to deal with foundations, retaining walls, boreholes, hand auger, scalar, pentameter, all that stuff, if you know what I'm talking about. But at that time, I did not have a degree. So I've been told that if you want an engineer title, you need to have a degree. So in 2016, I made a decision to come to University of Canterbury to upskill myself. It was a long and hard 4 years at university as a student, but that's probably one of the best decisions I made in my life. My original plan was to, get my degree, get out of university as soon as I can, and jump back into the civil industry. You're probably wondering what made me to change my mind and work in the fire engineering industry instead. There's a couple of reasons. At final year of my degree, I took on a project which was, look at how structural elements perform on the fire conditions by, utilizing structural fire modeling. I think the project went pretty well. It interests me a lot, I would say. Also, the project required me to take a fire engineering entry paper, which taught me all the fundamentals about fire engineering. At that time, I was told by my project supervisor that there's a shortage of fire engineers in New Zealand. It has a pretty solid career future. He suggested me to take a summer intern job to see if I like fire engineering or not. So pretty much I did what he said. I managed to find myself a summer intern position at a fire consulting firm in Christchurch. During my time there, I had opportunities to see what a fire engineer does, and I was exposed to different aspects of fire engineering. I went to site visit with other engineers to observe and learn what do they undertake during site visit and what do we look for on site. That's when I started to consider fire engineering as a future career. End of the day, no matter, if you work as a structural engineer or fire engineer, and your job is all about people safety. If you're a structural engineer, you want to design building that do not collapse during an earthquake. If you are a fire engineer, you want to make sure your building occupants can safely evacuate. So end of the day, it's all about protect people's assets. Also, I was very lucky to receive the fire emergency scholarship to study the fire master course at the University of Canterbury. I've been told that to promote our scholarship. Just to let you know that Fire Emergency in New Zealand provides a number of full scholarship opportunities every year for you to study the fire master course at UC. If you consider fire engineering as a future career, you want to come study, do the master studies, just let you know that there are some money out there for you to grab. So as of study, friends told me they have a graduate position available. So here I am today. I think sometimes, I totally changed my career path, but I believe sometimes if you talk to other people, do your research and have some consideration. Sometimes you can potentially make a good decision at the right time. We are not consulting engineers at FINS. We primarily work as a, what should I say, a regulatory type of function. So here are some co-responsibility we do. We do lots of design review. So we get certain jobs sent to us from council for review. So we pretty much check the fire design against the relevant building code requirements and provide some reasonable comments, which will help the council to make a decision on the building consent application. So during the review process, we pretty much look at two things. We want to make sure that occupants in building can safely evacuate during a fire event. And we also want to make sure that the building has sufficient firefighting facility for our firefighter to use. Also, it will be safe for them to undertake firefighting and rescue operations. Sometimes if we say there's an opportunity to improve the level of fire safety, we will leave a recommendation for the building owner and fire designer to consider. Apart from design review, we also get involved in the FEB, which what we call fire engineering brief. So we work with fire consulting engineers as a preliminary design stage to provide feedbacks on the proposed design methodology. Similar to design review, we want to make sure that firefighting facility adequately provided, and we also agree on initial design methodology and design parameters. Apart from design review and FEB, we also carry out fire station design for our own fire stations. This includes new and existing fire stations across the country. Currently, fire emergency, I think, own about 600 plus fire stations. We have a specific fire engineering design guide to use for our fire stations. So it's plenty of work to work on for our own properties. This is the only time we work as a consulting engineer. So our client is the people from the property team. Our goal is to help them to deliver the project within time, within budget. We also do a post-incident analysis based on real fire incidents. So we're pretty much trying to understand what caused the fire and how the fire system performed and what went well and what didn't. It's a good opportunity for us to learn from this fire incidents and feedback into our design review and FEB. We can also potentially influence both design standards and the building code. That's how we add value to the fire engineering industry. We also working on some special projects. Currently, I'm involved in a project to look at fire safety for buildings on the construction and demolition stage. So at that time, the building has not been installed with the required fire alarm systems. So apparently we have a concern about the fire risk. So this project requires us to go and engage with people from the construction industry to get their feedback so we can come up with some solutions to deal with the fire risk. We are also involved in technical advice. So we provide technical advice internally for our operational staff and externally for professional consultants or relevant agency. What I like about my role at fire and emergency, every day is different. Every design review and every FEB is different. Sometimes I doing design review FEB for smaller retail space. Sometimes I deal with a slightly larger building, a multi-story office, a multi-story apartment. Sometimes the building getting quite complex, a large warehouse, more than 20 meters storage height, with automated storage racking system as post many design challenge. So every day is different. I don't really get bored at work, and at this role require lots of decision making. In order to make those decisions, I have to go communicate with people. I go and coordinate with people. I have to think, require lots of thinking, compared with my previous role. I remember, I deal with lots of spreadsheet, everything is heavily templated. I just checking the number, half of the job done. So, it doesn't give me the opportunity to think outside of the box. And also at this role, given our involvement in FEB and design review, we have lots of opportunities to influence the building design in a positive way. Last night, I was looking at, I pretty much work out how many jobs I've done over the since last February. I was involved in 37 FEB, 159 design review, and a couple of fire station design. So that's about, what should I say, if I'm math correctly, that's about more than 200 buildings, no matter the existing or new buildings. Had my little contribution on the building design, and I'm sure I have influenced the building design in sort of a positive way. Yeah, I hope my presentation will help you to consider fire engineering as your future career. So that's all from me. I will pass it to Priya. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Next up is Priya Parag. She's from Beca as well as Tyler. I will pass you over to Priya.
Kia ora, guys. My name's Priya Parag, and I am a senior fire engineer at Beca. So it seems like either fire engineers like to break the rules, or we just don't listen to them, because I did something similar and didn't do a day in the life of. I went more of the format of who, what, when, where, how, and why to talk about fire engineering today. So I thought I'd start off with who. So this is me. I am Priya. I am a 28-year-old that lives in Tauranga. As most people my age, I like to travel and hang out with friends. Obviously, can't really get around to international travel at the moment, so looking forward to get around to doing that a bit more. And I just want to put this bottom photo here up, which is my family, not including the All Blacks, but we've got my mum and my dad and my two younger brothers. My youngest brother, the little short one there, is no longer that short at least. He's actually meant to be in this presentation, so I thought I'd just test out to see if he's actually in the presentation and listening to me. And yeah, with that, I'm half Pākehā, half Indian, so got a really cool cultural background. And I'm also a hard worker. I am a procrastinator and a bit of a mother hen, so that just leads to some really interesting times. What? So we've covered a lot of what today with fire engineering. As we've already mentioned, I'm a consultant engineer and I'm a senior engineer. So I do spend a lot of time working on design and mostly in the office, but there are definitely opportunities that you would get out of the office. The photo there is me on a construction site. We don't usually get to spend, fire engineers, as much time on construction sites as other consulting engineers, but really we get other opportunities. So for example, we get to go talk to clients, as you've heard a lot about. We get to talk to different councils and other engineers, and we also go to a lot of existing buildings. So anytime you make a change to a building, an existing building, you need to get some sort of fire review or assessment there. So that brings us involved into that area. And I guess the one little part I just wanted to add on to consultant fire engineering is about the fact that we don't actually create anything. We don't design anything. We create a holistic design. And so that's to make sure that people can get out of the building, and also to make sure that firefighters can get in and do their job and get out of the building. We've already heard some of that stuff today. A bit more about myself, but more about probably my origin story, where and when. So I grew up in Wellington. I went to Wellington Girls College, and then in my last year I realised I wanted to go do fire engineering. So I went down to Canterbury and did civil engineering there. Spent 4 years doing that, and then went on to do my Masters of Engineering Studies at Canterbury. After I finished that studies, I went on and moved up to Tauranga, which is where I live now, and I work for Beca, and been here for the past 5 years, living on old sunny Bay of Plenty. So how? So as I said, I did my undergrad in civil engineering. The top photo there is a picture of one of my teammates and our bridge that we built in second year civil engineering. And in my class, like I said, a procrastinator and a mother hen. So in the last minute, we really ran around, and our design was not as good as it should have been. It was over-designed essentially in the end when we panicked. So realised that civil engineering was not my calling, and actually developed during that time that fire engineering was actually my calling. So I went down and did an extra year of study to do a Masters of Engineering Studies, and not a full Masters of Engineering. So the reason why I did a Masters of Engineering Studies and not the full one, so that's an 8 paper, 2 semester course set of work rather than a 2-year excursion for a Masters of Engineering. Mostly because I talked to people in the industry. I said, hey, look, am I jeopardizing my career by doing not a full Masters of Engineering? They said, no, you get out into the industry earlier and you get to learn and practice your professional skills. And because I had nothing that I was really passionate about, that I wanted to do a thesis on in particular, I was definitely passionate about fire engineering. I just chose the engineering studies and got into the industry 1 year sooner. Tyler did also touch on the fact that you can do part-time versus full-time. I did full-time because I had a really good group of friends in Christchurch. I was already down there and set up, and I thought, hey, what's another 1 year going to do? The way that Tyler's doing it is part-time, and Debbie's touched on it as well, that you can, lots of companies will employ you coming out of your undergrad, and you'll go through and then they'll put you through the course. Now, I can't really speak from many other companies, but I know our team here at Beca we put you through the course, so you'll also work full-time, but you'll get your time off if you want to go do those courses. So Beca will send you down to do the course in Canterbury, we'll pay for your accommodation and your course fees. So that's covered there, and then it just takes a bit longer to do the 8 papers because you do 1 a semester whilst working. That's the part-time study there. And I swapped the how and the why around. I was aware of that because the why is the real reason we're here. Just vomited a whole bunch of photos onto the page here so I could talk to them. So the flame in the top part of the screen there, can't tell if it's left or right because I think it might be inverse for me, is about obviously the fact that it's fire. How exciting is fire? On a day-to-day basis, we spend time talking about and thinking about how does a fire start? What is around that can ignite it? What fuel load is there to have? What happens if there's a different kind of fuel load? How does the smoke affect the people in the building? Where is it going to move? Is it going to move through this path or this path? And that stuff's really quite fun to do. It seems a bit dystopic and we kind of talk about the worst case scenario, but hey, it's really cool and interesting, and you get to put your technical side to the test. Down the page there, we've got the team, the people, as lots of people, everyone said here, the reason we do fire engineering, why we love it, is because it's about our team and our culture. And especially for what I love about it, Beca, it's a big company, but we've got a small team and a big company. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the benefits of having a really tight-knit team, like a family, like Tyler said. But we also get some of the benefits of being a multidisciplinary company. So we get to really learn about the coordination that we do there. If I continue around the side there, you get opportunities that you don't get if you do other kind of other engineering disciplines. So for example, last week I was able to go and guest lecture at Toyohomai, which is the local polytech here in Tauranga, and I got to teach architectural graduates about fire engineering and what they need to know about fire engineering. And I essentially got to talk about fire engineering for about 2.5 hours, which was it's just very easy to do when you're passionate about something. So got that opportunity. And then the next day I got in the car and I was able to zoom up to Thames and present my assessment that I had done for the existing Thames Hospital building. And that's something that I've been working on for 3 years and was really proud of. And my boss had let me go along and do it myself. The client was there, the council was there, and it was a pretty political discussion and meeting. And I got to host that and run that unsupervised. That's not really opportunities you get with other disciplines when you're only got 5 years out of uni. And then I know a lot of people talk about the projects being the main reason, but it is definitely a large reason. The last two there is the Farmers building that's in Tauranga, which is the largest commercial development in Tauranga, being able to be a part of that and really see how that's starting to shape the Tauranga CBD. And then that one in the back there, the top photo of a building, is a mental health facility that I've been working on in the past year in Tauranga and in Auckland, and it has been the most challenging time of my life. I've really got to push myself as a fire engineer. Every assumption that I have made, I've learned over the past 4 or 5 years as a fire engineer, I'm not able to make on that building. Everything has to be challenged. And because of that, I've had to work really closely with mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, the architect, the client, who's going to be in the building and run the building at the end of the day, and all sorts. I've also had to, as a team, we've also had to justify our design to 3 different professional engineers: the fire service, like Peter, another company, which is another fire engineer called peer reviewer, and then also Auckland Council, which have their own fire engineers. So I guess what everyone's saying, and it seems to be kind of cognizant around all fire engineers today, is the variety that you get with fire engineering on a day-to-day basis. The fact that you get to work with some awesome people and you get to talk to people. And then you also get to work with the community and you work with life safety. And also the fact that you get to play with fire and you get to talk about fire. So, I mean, who wouldn't want it? And also, if you go through the course, you essentially become a master of fire. So that's always pretty cool. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Priya. We are running out of time, but we will do a few quick questions. So we've got one. Is the MN study at UC structured for full-time study and are lectures spread throughout the week? Are you able to see that one? Other panelists, does anyone have anything?
Yep, maybe I could answer here. Given that I'm currently in the process of doing the masters. So I suppose if you were doing the Masters of Engineering Studies full-time, it would be structured quite similar to maybe something along the lines of a 4th year engineering paper. When you're doing it part-time, what actually ends up happening is you do usually twice every semester 3 days of really intensive learning where it's just full-time lectures all day from 9 till 5 and labs and stuff where you get to burn couches, everything you can think of. So that's how it's kind of structured per paper, and if you're just doing one paper a semester, depending on where you live in New Zealand, you can say fly down to Christchurch, just spend 3 days there, fly back. You know, there'll be assignments and stuff dispersed throughout the semester. Then usually there'll be a second block course, as they are known, closer to the end of the semester, where you'll fly down again, maybe spend a few more days, and then and that's kind of how the learning is structured. So I guess to summarize, you'll usually have block courses for each paper condensed into around 3-day stints twice every semester. And then there's kind of content which is trickled through in between those block courses. I hope that makes sense.
Thanks, Tyler. So here's a comment. Is it that FE gets people out safely and fire protection engineering actually protects the client or asset and building? Does anyone have a response to that on our panel?
I can maybe have a crack at that, Grace. And again, taking this from the researcher that doesn't really do either of them, but the fire engineer and the fire protection engineers really work together. So the fire protection engineers are about delivering the systems like sprinkler systems and alarm systems, passive sometimes, whereas the fire engineers doing that holistic bit that Priya was mentioning, which is the overall fire safety strategy. Which system should we install? You know, how much time do people have to get out? But so fire engineers aren't just life safety either. They also get involved with property protection. The one other thing I was going to throw in there, again, Hopefully I'm not speaking too much out of turn, but if you are interested in going to school, but you don't know if you want to quite go for the master's or even the bachelor's, there is now a diploma in fire engineering, New Zealand diploma in fire engineering, available through Open Polytech, I believe. So it's a 2-year program. I don't think you'd have to do more study. You couldn't just go from that into the master's, but there's lots of jobs in fire that, you know, aren't at that, don't require that full master's program. Getting involved with passive, doing sprinkler design, you know, working for the council, doing inspection sometimes, working some other roles at FENS that aren't part of the fire engineering unit. So yeah, there's that is another option.
Thanks for that, Kevin. I just maybe as an example of how that fire protection versus fire engineer thing would work on a project. So in my type of job, I would be looking at a building and going, these are the things that we need to do. And I would say, hey, we need a smoke alarm specified to 4512. And then the fire protection engineer would be the person that would actually go and decide, this is exactly where we need to put the alarms to comply with what the fire engineer has specified. Something along those lines. Same with sprinkler design and other fire protection tasks.
Yeah, one of the great parts about fire engineering as well is you tell people what they need to do. So what they have to do, we tell architects that they need to build a firewall over here and what it needs to be. We tell the mechanical engineer that this is a firewall, so you need to put a damper through it, and we don't actually do much ourselves. So yeah, you can take it as you will if that's what you want or what you don't want. It's a bit funny sometimes. So.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions for specific people or about the industry in general? So there's one about IFE UK members practicing in New Zealand. I'm not familiar with that specifically, but
I could have another crack at that, Grace. So the IFE, there's different levels of membership. So again, some of them will sort of translate to that diploma level. There are higher levels, but ultimately, and at the moment, engineering regulation is going through a bit of flux. So historically, you could sort of call yourself a fire engineer without being chartered professional, but definitely in the next few years, that's going to change, where it's going to become a lot more protected, I think. So, so I think Debbie was asked this question as well. So there are pathways to get to chartered professional without necessarily having an engineering degree. An engineering degree isn't the be all end all. It's sort of like a quality assurance measure. It says that you've taken all the courses, done that. There's other ways to get the knowledge, but then you have to demonstrate that. They make you write a bunch of exams and show your experience. It's generally considered a lot harder. It's not impossible. It does work for some people.
thanks, Kevin. I think we have answered all the questions. So just like to say thank you to the other panelists. Oh, you've got something else, Priya?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I just thought something I realized nobody actually touched on is, and no one's actually asked it, is about pay. And
cool.
so fire engineering is, as Tyler did touch on, is a specialty service, and actually Peter also did touch on that it's in demand, and so we're always in need for fire engineers. And so one, because you've got an extra level of qualification, you've got your masters. Two, we're in demand, and three, you've got a specialty skill that not a lot of people have. That is the perfect, essentially we get paid a bit more than your standard mechanical, electrical, civil engineer. So you start on a slightly higher salary, you progress faster because you spend more time building those professional skills of talking to people, and technical skills as well. So just thought I'd touch on that you do get paid a little bit more, and also it's quite transferable around the country. I mean, around the world, fire burns the same in the southern hemisphere than it does in the northern hemisphere. It's just how that country will, how much importance they put on fire safety there. So really transferable around the country and around the world, and also pays really well in a lot of those places, especially in New Zealand.
Yeah, that's a great point, Priya. That information, if anyone is interested, I think has just been released on the Engineering New Zealand website as well, around exactly kind of what the industry standards are for pay and that sort of thing, if anyone's interested, which why wouldn't you be? I think we've just got one more come up. How important do you think it is for fire engineers to maintain timelines and deadlines? That comes up a lot. It's really important. It's not necessarily always the easiest thing to do. Like, it's been touched on by a few people, but we do, because we work with so many other people, we rely on a lot of other people as well, and it's not necessarily always easy to control what everyone in that whole team is able to do in terms of timelines. Is there anything you want to say on that, Priya? Because I'd imagine you've probably got.
Well, I've got one tomorrow, so
yeah.
So, yeah. No, you and as speaking as a procrastinator, you do just work hard to meet those deadlines. Sometimes you can get them pushed out. A lot of the time, that deadline corresponds with the rest of the design team and other consecutive design stages. So you really do need to work hard to meet those deadlines. And it's a lot of the time it is up to you, and as maybe not so much as a graduate, but as you get into your own kind of groove as an intermediate and above engineer, you need to make sure that you really can learn to say no and manage your own workload as well, because you can say no when you're kind of working out which projects are, so that your deadlines don't have as much stress on you. So
yeah, if you don't mind me interrupting there as well, I was just going to mention that in engineering, it's not necessarily always about the deadline. It's also about what you do leading up to that deadline. So it's all well and good to prepare some kind of design and kind of in your own little bubble, but as fire engineers, we like we were saying before, we actually need to work with the other disciplines to let them know what they need to do from a fire safety perspective, and that they aren't kind of left in the dark. So having communication with the rest of our team before the deadlines is really important as well.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, sort of run a bit over time, but I mean, you don't have to look very far. You know, it's not just the high profile projects like Transmission Gully that go over budget and over schedule. So, I mean, it does happen. It's not the end of the world. But there was a question earlier for Debbie about dropping down a bit in hours. I'm actually planning on doing that because my wife, we're actually just expecting our first here right away. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to go, but it is possible, you know. Yeah.
We have two that do just work part-time. We've got our lady in Oamaru that Debbie was talking about. She has just come back to work after 10 years out of the industry and is working. She works 4 days a week in between school hours, and that works for her. We've had another one in Auckland at the moment. He's a senior engineer, is doing the same kind of thing. So it's definitely possible in the industry to be able to do that sort of thing. Good luck with that, Kevin.
yeah.
Very exciting.
Thanks.
Right. I think we will wrap it up there and let everyone get on with their evenings. Thank you so much to our panelists for your time tonight. It's been great hearing from you all. We will jump out now. Okay, thank you.